All right. So again, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here today for our interviewing how to prep for your next one workshop. I really enjoy chatting about this topic because when I was an undergrad at UVA, I was also a first gen student, and thinking about college and even internships was just really new to me. And unfortunately, I never utilized the resources of the career office, but I did use a lot of faculty mentorship to kind of help me make my way through. And so when I had my first couple of interviews, and I'd never visited the career office, of course, I was able to talk about myself. Any of us could talk about ourselves right now if an employer or if I started asking you questions. But our comfort level at being able to do that and tell a good story might not be as dialed in as we would want it to be. And so my first couple of interviews were definitely not strong. I can look back and see where I made some mistakes. But over time, I learned some of the skills and tricks of how to become a better interviewee. And I now feel like I could almost prepare for any interview and do really well because I know what steps to take to prepare. So that's why I was really excited to have this workshop today. I'm going to share some of my favorite tips with you, along with ones from employers. And then we're also going to carve out a little bit of time for you to actually take some action steps today. So you're not just walking away today with some good tips and advice, but you've also started the process of preparing for your next interview. So I am curious if I have any friends who also love The Office. Not all of us are going to have the confidence of Dwight Schrute, where he feels like, no, no, no. Of course, I'm ready for this interview. I want to know if the interview is ready for me. It's really normal for us to feel nervous before an interview, whether we're prepared or not, to have those butterflies the morning of and leading up to it. And so again, I hope that everyone walks away today just feeling a little bit more confident that even if I'm nervous for a future interview, I know how to tackle it. So kind of how do we start? I want you all to think about adopting this mentality that I'm going to mention. Like I said earlier, I could tell stories about myself right now. So could any of you if an employer literally said, hey, Allison, I'm ready to have an interview with you at this very moment. You'd be able to talk about yourself. If you had an interview 6 months ago, you've had that experience before, but you probably haven't told a lot of stories about yourself since then. So if you've ever played a sport or practiced and played an instrument, or even thinking about where you are in your academics and the more confident you feel as you master more skills, I see interviewing being the same way, as a learned skill set, something that you can become better with over time. It's not something you're either born with or not, but just like, again, playing an instrument, you learn your instrument, you learn how to read music and play the notes. And if you've been playing your instrument for a while and practicing, you're like in a place where you're in the zone, you're able to pick up your instrument and play really well. Now, if you put your instrument aside for a year and picked it back up, you're still going to be able to play. You might be a little rusty, but you're going to get back into that groove quickly. Same thing with a sport, or if you've never run before and you want to do the Couch to 5K program to start prepping for a race, you can go out there and start. And when you're in season with your sport, or when you've been training for a while, you're going to perform better on game day or competition day. I see interviewing be the same. We're going to go through some exercises and activities today that can help you start preparing for, how do I pre-identify what I think the employer might ask me? How can I pre-identify some of my responses? And then when I'm in the zone of applying to internships and jobs and maybe being in interview season, what are some really easy things that I can do every day to prep my mind with stories I want to tell, and to make sure that my mind and my mouth are in sync, and the things that I'm wanting to say in my mind are actually the things that are hopefully coming out of my mouth and telling a really nice, concise, and cohesive story. So again, I firmly believe that interviewing is a learned skill set and that we can all get better. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to be covering more today. My goals for you are that you leave this feeling like you know how to train and prepare for any behavioral interview, and I'll define that. I want you to better understand what an employer needs to learn about you during an interview. And the number one thing that I hope you all walk away with today is that you have started to develop what we might call your toolkit of stories. We're also going to talk about everything in threes today. So 3 phases of interviewing, 3 steps to interview prep, And we're going to spend most of our time looking at 3 ways to prep for questions. So as we move forward, I know I talked today about this being a how to prep for your next behavioral interview. So a behavioral interview is the most common style of interviewing, and it will likely start with a few opening questions. Tell me about yourself. Why did you choose UVA? Why did you choose your particular field of study? So the beginning of an interview, I see it as like the agenda or outline slide of a presentation or the opening statement of a court case. You're just kind of setting the stage, introducing yourself and a few reasons that you're interested in the job. And then the middle of an interview is going to be where the behavioral questions come into play. This might be like the slides of our deck today or the testimonies in a court case. So a behavioral interviewing question usually starts with, tell me about a time when. Describe a situation in which this happened, or give me an example of. So the employer is actually using their words to prompt you to identify an exact example of when something has happened in the past. And they want you to think back not to a general answer or how you think you might handle something hypothetically. They want you to identify an example of where you've demonstrated a certain skill in the past, because they believe the best predictor of your future behavior on the job or internship with them, you can actually look at your past behavior as a good way to indicate how you'll perform. So if they want someone that's like a really strong team player, they're probably going to ask you to talk about a successful team experience you've been a part of. And that gives them evidence. Look, Heather performed really well in a team before. Well, that wasn't dependent on the context of being in a team project in the classroom. So if we bring her in to work with us, she'll probably be a really good team player again. So those are the types of questions we're going to be focused on. They're going to take up the majority of your interview. And then I like to see the interview as the summary or question slide or a closing argument. The end of an interview is where an employer might ask you, so Heather, you shared a lot about yourself today. Just let us know why you think we should hire you. This doesn't mean that they don't think that you could do the job, but they kind of want to give me a chance to summarize of all the things that I've said during that middle portion, almost again like a summary paragraph, being able to say, here's what I hope you're taking away from our conversation today, employer. And then of course, they're going to give you a chance to answer some questions yourself. So those are kind of the 3 overall phases that I see in an interview. And then these are the overall steps that I would want you all to take to prep for an interview. We're not going to dig into the research side today, but again, looking at the company's website, their LinkedIn page, I highly recommend Glassdoor.com if that's not something that you've taken a look at before. And then a day or 2 before the interview, I always recommend just doing a quick online search for the company. Sometimes a press release or an article gets mentioned about that company the day before the day of the interview. And if you're able to reference some big news that the company just had come out, then that's a really good tactic to share. I'm really interested in your organization. Reflect is what we're going to focus on today, how to really prep for the questions themselves. And then rehearse is something that I'm going to challenge all of you to do after today. And you can certainly schedule a mock interview with me or any of the members of my team. So these stories, this toolkit of stories I told you I'd like you to start developing today. If you have a mock interview with us, you can actually start working on verbalizing the stories that you've come up with. But let's get right to the main reason that you're here today, the things that I want you to walk away with. When you are thinking about a behavioral interview, these are the 3 ways that I want you to prepare for questions ahead of time. We're going to dig into this one more, but refreshing yourself with the experiences included on your resume. I don't know about you, but when you look at your resume, when is the last time that you actually talked to anyone about that experience? Even if it was a project in the classroom sometime last fall, once you submitted that project or that homework assignment, or you participated in a hackathon, have you really talked to anyone about it since? Probably not. And so that means while you could try to brainstorm the details about that in an actual interview response, it might be a little tricky. And so we're going to engage in an exercise that actually helps you like pull those memories from the recesses of your mind back up to the forefront. And I'm going to give you 3 questions to ask yourself about the experiences on your resume and to actually start jotting down some of those answers today. We're also going to look at a few common questions that aren't necessarily behavioral questions. Again, those ones that start with, tell me about a time when. Because a behavioral interview usually actually involves a few questions just about your resume, or a few common questions like, what are 3 strengths that you have? And what about a weakness? Those can be woven into those storytelling behavioral interviews. And then the one thing that I feel like most candidates don't do, so we're definitely going to carve out time for this today, is to learn how to dissect a job description to give you even further clues about the exact types of questions that an employer is going to ask you. So again, you can go in equipped and not wondering, what are they going to ask me? So in the spirit of continuing things in threes, I would love for you all right now to pull up your resume, or if you already have it with you, great. And we're going to look at some of the experiences on your resume. And I'm going to ask you to pull up your resume and just choose one experience. That could be a course project, research project that you're engaged in, a student organization, a summer job, any experience on your resume. And I want you to spend some time identifying whether it's in a Google Doc, jotting it down on a scratch piece of paper right now. I want you to ask yourself, what was the best thing about this experience? Maybe if it was a course project, maybe it was the fact that your group kind of got stuck for a while, but then you were able to take a step back and figure out where the roadblock was. And maybe you were able to pitch a solution or pitch a workaround or pitch starting from scratch. And that helped lead your team to success. But that might not be in the bullet point that's there, right? So there are things that happen in any experience that don't end up making it into a bullet point. So I want you to jot down, what was the best thing about this experience? What was the most challenging? And I want you to look at each bullet point and refresh yourself. What was going on in that experience that we don't see? Again, how did I help problem solve? In the role that I took on, what were the micro steps that I took to be able to actually get that task complete? Was there anything innovative that we did? Did we end up presenting this to my class? And maybe I didn't write that down. So again, we're just going to take a few moments now. I'm probably going to put myself on mute. Just choose any experience, and I want you to jot down answers for these 3 things. If you have any questions while we're at it, feel free to answer in the chat. But I'm going to give you all just a few minutes to work on that. And like I said, I'll mute myself. So we just had someone new join us. We are currently working on the slide that you see here. We are looking at our resume and we are choosing one experience, whether it was paid or unpaid, in or outside of the classroom. And we are going back and jogging our memory. And we are actually answering these 3 questions about one experience from the resume. And of course, if you have any thoughts or questions that you'd like to share, you can always send them just to me in the chat, or you can share them with everyone, whatever works better for you. And also, when I say the best thing too, you might just not write, we got the best feedback from our professor, but you also might ask yourself, well, what was that feedback and why did we get that feedback? Again, like going back and really putting yourself into that moment and remembering what was said, what was celebrated, the action steps that you took that just are kind of in between the lines of your bullet points that never actually made it to print. And I think we saw one other person just come in. We're just working on an activity that's on the current slide. Welcome. I'm going to send a follow-up to everyone that is here today. So if you, wherever you might be in this experience, I'm going to send you again the questions that I'm getting ready to say, but maybe some additional things to noodle if you're stuck on any one of these or you're trying to figure out what else to elaborate on. This might be part of the best thing, but maybe another question to ask is, what am I most proud of from this experience? Another question is, what are 2 or 3 things that I learned or improved upon as a result of this experience? So maybe there was a challenge that you encountered in that experience, and the next time you had a project or a student org where that same challenge came up, maybe you were ahead of the curve and you didn't experience that again. So just what are 2 or 3 things that you learned or improved upon? And then I really think it's really important for everyone to think of this question, and not that many people do. How has this experience helped prepare me for this job I'm applying to? And so there's not going to always be a direct link. For example, I worked in retail for a summer that I was in college, and no, that doesn't reflect upon the job that I'm experiencing now directly, but how might it do so indirectly? How were my teamwork, my problem solving, my ability to, my customer service skills might then relate to how am I also really good at listening to folks and building rapport with people across a variety of ages and backgrounds. So I want you to also maybe be thinking about that. Again, I'll send this question as a follow-up, but what's in it for the employer that you've engaged in these experiences in or outside of the classroom? What is like one nugget, technical, non-technical, interpersonal communication skills, leadership, and so on? What's one nugget that you can draw away from that experience that would be of value to the employer? So we're going to stop there with looking at this particular screen. I would love if someone felt comfortable putting something into the chat or even taking themselves off of mute, and just sharing, like, was this easy to start generating? Was it challenging? Have you ever done something like this before? Does this feel doable? I would just love to hear from someone, yeah, in the chat, or take yourselves off mute. I'm going to get a sip of water. Quiet room today. Hi, Dana. I see my colleague Dana is here. Well, beyond doing it for this one experience, and I hope this was helpful to start, I want you to then maybe every day or every other day for the next week, continue doing this for all of your experiences. Once you have this jotted down in a Google Doc or in a notepad that you might keep, this is not going to be an activity that you're going to have to engage in before every interview. You're already going to have been, again, training, preparing. And so before an interview, you'll be able to go back and refresh yourself on what has happened in the past. So you'll be, again, those brainstormed ideas will be more fresh in your mind. Okay, so Allison mentioned that she feels like she's choosing what feels most impressive than rather most rewarding. Okay, and I'm not sure if that was from the best thing, Allison, but maybe the best thing could be looked at in various ways. It could be, well, what do I feel would be impressive to the employer, to someone outside, but also what was the most rewarding? What was the best? What did I feel the most proud of? Like, what was rewarding to me? Best might have been, and best doesn't have to mean it was a 4.0 GPA. It was, a gold medal. The best thing might have been, I was really able to help one of my friends who was feeling stuck and behind in this topic. I was able to catch them up to speed. They had not been able to understand how the professor was explaining this, but I was able to find a way that it really clicked with my peer. So best doesn't have to mean like the absolute best thing ever. It's just, what did you find most exciting, rewarding, what might connect to the employer's needs the most? That best word can mean a lot of things. So Allison, I appreciate you saying that. Just like the most challenging, sometimes I find students in mock interviews saying, what was the absolute like worst thing, or how did we really fail? Again, it doesn't have to go to that extreme. It could be, hey, the challenging thing was that my team had 3 different directions they wanted to go to in the beginning of the project. And so it took a little bit longer for us to decide on a direction and move forward. So maybe we had less time to actually implement the project because we just all couldn't really build consensus. And what I learned from that is, so again, the worst thing or the best thing doesn't have to be at either extreme. It's just normed on that experience. Yeah, no worries. Someone just said that they weren't going to be able to stay. No worries. We're recording this, and I want this to be helpful for you. So whatever works best for you. All right, let's move along to our next slide. I also mentioned that sometimes there are common questions that are common enough that I never want anyone to be thrown off that these questions are asked. Not that I want you to have memorized an answer, but I want these questions to be so expected that if you were asked them, you're like, okay, like I have, again, mentally prepared for this question. I have thought through how I might approach it. I've maybe even written out some text and I've practiced saying it out loud a few times. So my brain to mouth connection feels comfortable with this answer. We're maybe not going to tackle this one as in depth today, but the tell me about yourself question is something that I want you all to feel so comfortable because again, you've rehearsed it, not memorized it, but that you've said it out loud multiple times before your interview, because this is often the first question. And it's often also when we're at the most nervous, we have the butterflies, maybe our heart's beating a little bit faster. And so because we're at our most nervous, I want this one to feel like I could almost say this one in my sleep. Because you're at your most nervous, I often feel that people in mock interviews talk very quickly on this one because they're nervous, or they fly through their answer, or they maybe even talk a really long time. So I know this is hard to do, but if you can, just remind yourself, just slow down a little bit so I don't fly through this answer. And another big question about tell me about yourself is, well, what does the employer want to know? There's so much I could share about myself. Of course there is. This can be maybe compared to the elevator pitch, if you're familiar with that, that just 30-second, a minute soundbite you might give to an employer at the beginning of a conversation, a networking conversation. So I see, tell me about yourself. Really, the next part of that you don't see is tell me about yourself, and in parentheses, meaning tell me what you've been doing in or outside of the classroom that has brought you to the point that we're having this conversation today. So what have you been studying, learning more about, engaging in, again, academically, project-wise, maybe internship-wise, depending on your, what have you, again, are you reading websites? Are you listening to podcasts? Like, how are you engaging with and interacting with material that is relevant to the type of work that we do? Tell me about what you've been studying and engaging with in or outside of the classroom that's established your interest in what I do, and that has started to give you some experience or a base of knowledge in what we do. And why are you interested in us? So actually, let's maybe take a minute now. Pretend that an employer that you've recently applied to, or a type of employer you would be interested in, has just asked me, tell me about yourself. And I want you to be able to jot down, what are 3 things in or outside of the classroom that can demonstrate to that employer, I'm curious about, I'm interested in the types of things that you do. Just jot those down really quickly. And then my colleague Dana and I that are here, if you want to come back and see us on Wednesday afternoon, we're going to be hosting a pitch workshop where you all can practice answering this question one-on-one with us in Zoom. So go ahead and take us a moment to just jot down, what are 3 things that you've been doing that could just show, here's how I've been exploring this. Again, it's so great to see so many familiar names on here and some new names as well. Some people I just met this week, some people that I've been working with since the fall. Great. All right, hopefully you've jotted down a few things. We're not going to take time to work on the why UVA and why your major, but that's often a question that gets asked maybe early on, even right after tell me about yourself. This is an effort to usually ease you into the interview a little bit more, give you what should be an easy question, and just develop rapport with you and your interviewer. Again, this should be something that we all have an answer to, but I think because it's such like an easy question, a lot of people haven't actually thought of an answer until they're speaking on the fly. And again, that answer will work just fine, but because it's common enough, I want you all to have just thought about that ahead of time. And again, it doesn't have to be anything earth shattering or really deep. Like I chose UVA because I know I really wanted to stay in state. And I know it was a great school. And when I visited, I was able to learn more about X, Y, and Z. And my major, I was curious about this in high school. And so I've read through the course requirements and, I'm really excited about what I see from upcoming courses. It can be something relatively straightforward. What I want us to workshop a little bit today, and this is where I'd be happy again for anyone to take themselves off of mute or send a message to me or to the group. I want everyone now to pause for several minutes. So we're going to be quiet for a while again. 3 strengths and a weakness. This question is not always going to come up, but even if it doesn't, you will find opportunities to share your strengths during the other interview questions. And whenever I ask this question during a mock interview, I find that the weakness students are more prepared for, but the 3 strengths, almost no one's prepared for. And again, this should be a gimme. I don't want anyone to walk into an interview without identifying ahead of time, what are 3 strengths that I have that the employer would also really see value in. So by strengths, I don't mean the superlative like Allison brought up earlier. What are the most impressive things? Or what do I do better than everyone else? You all probably have a lot of strengths in common. So just thinking about of all the traits that you have and the skills that you have, what are ones that you consider to be strengths of yours? And you probably have 10, 15 or more. But this is where students, again, have a challenge. They try to think about their 3 greatest strengths. The employer's not looking for your 3 greatest strengths. They're looking for, Dana, of the many strengths that you do have, what are 3 that you would like to tell me about today? Because by knowing the job description, you probably know we would love someone that is a really strong listener, that has technical skills in this area, and someone that is intellectually curious. Like we've told you that in the job description. So if those also happen to be 3 of your strengths, we want to hear about those. So I want everyone to take a moment now and just identify 3 of your many strengths, write down what they are, and then at least for one of them, I want you to actually write an example. So if listening is a nice strength of yours, think of a time where your listening skills helped your team or helped you in your student org. I also want you to think of a weakness, and I want you to reframe a weakness. Again, not something that is something that you're just horrible at and terrible. Again, students tend to go there. But where's an area of challenge for you? Where is an area where you maybe still need to grow? What is something that was maybe in the job description that you just haven't had as much exposure to yet as you would like, and you would want to maybe brush up on that or teach yourself some of that before the internship or job started. So take a moment now, and then maybe I'll just talk through a couple of ideas with you all. Okay, well, I'm letting you all continue to have a think for another minute. I'm wondering if anyone feels comfortable enough to share what one of their strengths is, and if they've been able to identify an example for that. And in addition, weakness, again, that can be a hard one to identify. I don't really want anyone to choose public speaking, that one that we all kind of default to. I would love to know, again, whether you feel more comfortable direct messaging me or not. What are you thinking of sharing here? And again, if you're stuck on something, let us know that too. This is our time to problem solve together. Sometimes when I'm working with my mock interview students, again, a potential weakness, some companies might have proprietary software, or maybe they're using like a language that maybe like a programming language, let's just say, that you're not as familiar with. And so again, a weakness could be, again, if you reframe it in your mind, don't say a weakness of mine, but where's an area where you can still grow? What's something you need more experience with? I've been able to pick up on, these two languages quickly recently. Here's what I've been taught in the classroom. I don't have as much exposure or experience yet with C++. I did have a brief introduction to it in a class that I took a year ago, but it's not a skill set that I've been able to use since. However, at the time that I was learning C++, I was able to pick up on it fairly quickly in the 4 weeks that we used it. And because I've been able to use Python and Java and so on, on a regular basis since, and become really adept at it, I know that if I took some time to do some free courses and trainings online with C++ before the internship started, I know that I'd be able to hit the ground running with some support from you all. So again, that can actually be a weakness in that situation. Like, oh, I haven't practiced this in a while, I haven't had a chance to, but here's how I can overcome that. So if you're talking about a weakness, an area of challenge, here's where I don't know that yet. Here's where it's something that I'm not as familiar with, but here's how I can anticipate learning that. Here's how I could get better. Here's how I've learned other things quickly in the past, which shows I can learn something new quickly. So again, I hope that this has been helpful. I'm also going to send you all additional common questions to consider. And again, I would want you every other day, a couple days a week, to just tackle one of those. So again, you can start building this toolkit of questions and answers that you've already thought about. So you're just, again, refreshing yourself the day of the interview. You're not having to remember all of these details. I mentioned earlier when we were just getting started that this is the one thing that I feel like most people do not do. So if there's only one slide that maybe you can take away from today, I would want this next activity to be the one. The job description of an employer is an amazing indicator of what the employer might ask you about. And often I think people think about what are common questions that I might expect. But if in the job description, an employer tells you we're looking for someone with these interpersonal skills, leadership, teamwork, communication, and so on, and we need someone that knows these particular technical skills. We need someone who is familiar with this particular type of academic content. Chances are then, if they need that, they need to see, can you meet that need? So they're going to be really likely to ask you a question that gets at, do you have the skills and the knowledge that we've asked in the job description? If you can help us make that match, well, then yeah, great. You'd be a great candidate for us to bring in. And so the job description is always going to be a great way to identify that. What we're going to do now is, I do have a job description that we can all share, but if you have a job description that you're wanting to apply to in the next couple of weeks, or that you very recently applied to, I want you to pull that up on your own browser and use that together. So I'm just going to pop over to this other tab, and maybe if someone, hold on, Handshake has signed me off. Let's log back in there. Wonderful. And that job description has gone away. So bear with me for a moment. I had one all pulled up. There we go. Because I felt like it would be broad enough that it could maybe apply to all. So what I want you all to do anytime that you encounter an internship or a job description is to take a look. And again, on a whiteboard, a piece of paper, a Google Doc, I want you to jot down every single technical skill, non-technical skill, and like, again, area of domain knowledge or academic knowledge that they want in a candidate. So I either want you just as an exercise to start looking at this job description and doing that now, or looking at your own, and then we'll come back together in just a minute. And I also just want to point out, as you're doing this, yes, the responsibilities or qualifications will give us some really nice clues, but often the kind of the overall description will give us some really nice clues as well. So we have in here analyzing a client's issues or objectives. So even just different pieces of information. Okay, well, analytical skills. So maybe I want to think of times where I've been able to demonstrate my analytical skills. It also mentions a client's issues or objectives. So in what way have I had a project in the classroom or outside in student club where we have either had a real client or a mock client? Have we ever had to design with an end user in mind, even if it wasn't, again, a company coming to my classroom to do this? So has there ever been anyone that's been a customer or client or an end user, real or designed for the purposes of an assignment? How did you take in what that client or end user's needs were? How did you work with them? We're seeing interviewing key client stakeholders. So again, if you've ever been part of a project in or outside of the classroom, did your stakeholders include fellow students? Maybe students of certain years, maybe it was an organization here in town, maybe it was professors, other members of the community. So when have you again had to think about not just who you were, what your year or what your situation is, but how were other people that were involved? It mentions participating and leading in teams. So we're going to want you to think about teamwork, and you're all practiced at working in teams. And so what you might want to think about is, what's a really good team that I felt a part of? Like, when did I feel successful in a team? Was there ever a time I felt challenged being in a team? And then, well, anyone can say they're a team player. When I, Heather Palmer, am in a team, what do I bring to the team? Like, no matter whether you plunk Heather down, when she is in a team, here are some of the traits or attributes or skills that I tend to bring to a team. Maybe that's something that my teammates have actually told me, like, hey, Heather, like, we really appreciate that you do X. Maybe it's a role that I always find myself playing within a team. I just kind of get nominated for that or fall into that. And so again, when you think about teamwork, they mention facilitating the requirements analysis process, developing strong working relationships with business partners. Well, maybe you've never developed strong working relationships with partners. Okay, where have you developed strong relationships with people? Where, and what might that look like? It might look like establishing rapport, developing trust, listening, identifying someone's needs or strengths, and making next steps together. It can look like a lot of things. So if you jot each and every one of these things down, I want you to start with that. We also have developing relevant industry and technology knowledge. Well, if there's ever a class that was maybe an elective for you, or a class where you were learning a new skill pretty intensely, that could be a great example of that. It never has to be like, oh yes, I've had an internship before, but I had to develop industry knowledge. No, smallify that on a smaller scale. How have I developed savviness in an area that was maybe really new to me? Or what is an area, like maybe I really care about space exploration. How do I stay on top of space exploration, even if I'm not an aerospace or a mech student? Yet again, mentions working sessions with clients. Maybe that's going to be a student org that you're a part of and your exec board. So hopefully you've all jotted those down now. What I want you to do, if you have not started, is for at least one of those skills, I want you to identify 2 or 3 examples in or outside the classroom, paid or unpaid, that demonstrate, yes, I have either fully developed that skill, I'm in the process of doing so, I've laid a foundation, or, oh, you want to know that someone has a working knowledge of X. Here's a class that I had. Again, here's a podcast that I listened to. Here's a newsletter I've subscribed to. Choose one skill from that job description we just looked at or your own, and come up with 2 or 3 different examples that illustrate, that demonstrate that you've been exposed to that. And try to remember a few details about it. And I'll give you all a minute to do that before we talk about the next step. Hassan, you had asked me, you said you might have a question about something. Feel free to pop that into the chat, or if you wanted to take yourself off of mute, you're welcome to do that as well. I know you had mentioned that, so whichever one you'd like to do. I'm going to let you all know too that what I'm asking you to do right now, I have done for my last several interviews. So again, I did not do this for my first couple ever. This is not an exercise I had learned to engage in. And yeah, this takes more time than just turning up to an interview the next day. But when I interviewed for my first job in this particular office, and then for a promotion at one point, I literally looked at the job description and I thought, wow, like I've been in this role for several years. Let me actually go back and identify the maybe coaching relationships that I've had with students that I'm most proud of. Did maybe a student have a particular challenge and we were able to navigate that well together? Who are students that I've met with that have maybe shared appreciation or really positive feedback for me? I didn't want to just say like, yes, I think I'm pretty good at advising and coaching students. I needed examples that actually backed that up. Instead of just saying like, yes, I think I'm great, here's this example, I was also able to say, here's what some colleagues have said about me. Here's what my students have said. That might help you as well. Sometimes feel like things are a little more objective. Other people are saying it, it's a fact, versus subjective, you're evaluating yourself. So those are some things to think about there. If you're thinking about, again, let's just say the skill teamwork. For me, not only do I work with my small team here within the engineering school, like that are just in my career services office, but I'm also part of the Global Careers Committee that serves all students at UVA. That's another example of teamwork. I also collaborate with several colleagues in the engineering school on initiatives for first generation students. So I could actually look at all these different examples and think about teamwork. And I would be able to like identify a particular example of how my colleague Dana, who's here, and I've collaborated before, and I would like refresh myself on those details because Dana and I have collaborated a lot. Well, I want to choose 2 or 3 examples of that. All right, hopefully you all have thought of an example by now, and if not, let's keep working on that this next phase. Hopefully you've heard about something called STAR, and if not, we're going to go into that. STAR is a technique. It is a template for answering those behavioral interviewing questions that we talked about in the very beginning. And we talked about, well, why do employers ask questions like, tell me about a time when, describe a situation in which? Again, they want to prompt you to think back to your previous experiences and to tell them a story that illustrates you have a skill they're looking for, because they believe that the best predictor of your future behavior on the internship or job with them is to look at your past behavior. So let's keep using that teamwork example. If the employer mentioned teamwork, which Cognizant did in their job description, again, they might ask a question, tell me about a time where you were working in a team and you were able to help your team meet the deadline on time. Tell me about a time that you were working in a team and something did not go according to plan. Describe a situation in which you were in a team and there were just too many good ideas to move forward. Because they can ask you to give a teamwork example but with different scenarios. That's why I think it's a great idea to not just come up with one teamwork example, but multiple ahead of time. And if we use that teamwork example, again, you might say, okay, I'm going to pick the one where they just asked me to tell them about a time where something didn't quite go according to plan. Well, maybe one of my teammates had something going on and they didn't show up to the first couple of meetings, and I wasn't sure if they were engaged in this project or if they were going to be able to participate. So using the STAR technique, you would actually tell me that story about that time where maybe a team member was having trouble participating fully by applying STAR. So situation means, well, give me the background. What was going on? Kind of the once upon a time of a story. The task is going to be, okay, great. What task was set before you all in this scenario? The action is where you should spend the majority of your answer, and it's where I find most candidates fly through it. No, this is where you want to spend more time going into step-by-step detail. And then the results is the part that I find that most candidates, students or otherwise, leave off. But the employer wants to know, well, what happened in the end? Did it have a positive outcome in the end? If there were still some challenges at the end, what did you learn from that? What did you take away that maybe you would either want to apply the next time the situation presents itself, or you've actually already applied when the situation has presented itself another time? And so maybe here we would say, oh, well, it was in my intro to engineering class a couple of years ago, and my professor had divided us into teams of 4 and had asked us to design an X, Y, and Z with these particular features. We were randomly assigned, our team members, and it was also our first year of engineering. So we didn't quite know the strengths of our teammates yet, and we were just developing this foundational engineering knowledge ourselves. So you're kind of just setting the stage with the situation and task. Maybe you're going to go on and mention that, in our first couple of meetings, one of my teammates didn't show up and I was wondering how they were doing. So I actually reached out one-on-one to that teammate to ask, like, how are they doing? Was everything okay? Let them know we missed them. I'd be happy to catch them up on the project and meet in person. And instead of just assuming that this person wasn't interested, what I came to find out is that this person was going through a tough time, or they were feeling really behind the rest of us because it seemed like it was clicking with the rest of us, but they weren't quite sure how they could contribute. And so you're going to walk through, here's what I asked the person. Here's how I was able to bring that person back into the fold and find ways that we could be helpful. And then results. In the end, my teammate felt a little bit more comfortable entering the group, and we were able to find 1 or 2 things that they felt most comfortable participating in. And what I really learned from that are ways to effectively, engage all members of my team, whether that's maybe during the collaboration and brainstorming process. Some people feel more comfortable being vocal, some might not. And so how can I approach a teammate that maybe is more quiet, or maybe seems more overwhelmed, or isn't able to participate as often? And so those are the different stages of how you'd want to tell your story. So I want each of you now to go back and again, look at those examples that you just came up with and just jot down as much as you can think of for the situation, task, action, and result. Just for one example, jot some of that down. I'll give you all a couple minutes just to start that, and then we'll come back together and go through our last few slides together.
Heather, can I interrupt and ask a question, like quick question?
Sorry, yes, I had muted myself, and I did see one other question. Yes, I am going to send these slides out to everyone as a PowerPoint show. When the recording is available early next week, I will follow up with everyone with the recording, and plus I'll give you a couple of other tips as well. Yes, and I got another question. Yes, I will definitely send the common questions. There are some things that aren't going to be on these slides, but that are supplemental, and I'll be sure to send that all to you. I have that already all pulled up. Great. All right, Hassan, what's on your mind?
Okay, so when we're like in the interview and answer question, how much time, like I mean, how long should our answers be before we let the interviewer ask another question? Like, I mean, but should it be more like a conversation? Like, I'll wait for the interviewer to ask or probe more into
Mhm.
question, or like should I just give all the answers? I mean, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful question, Hassan. Some employers approach how conversational they are a little bit differently. And so my recommendations is, and again, some people keep their answers like really short, like maybe a minute. Again, one of the articles I'm going to send you all actually has some typed out examples. I like to kind of keep my responses, if I can, to 2 to 3 minutes. And that might sound like, whoa, like even 3 minutes. But when you're telling a story, that really flies by. So maybe trying to keep it roughly to 2 to 3 minutes. Some employers, like my colleague Dave Ong, he's very conversational, and so you might even start telling the situation and task part, and before you've gotten to action results, he might be like, ooh, Asan just said something that makes me really curious about the situation and task. So before he goes on, I don't want to wait till the end to ask. I'm going to actually ask right now. And so he's not trying to cut you off from answering the rest of your question, but he wants to know, like, ooh, tell me more about this piece that you just asked. And so the whole star might not be, I'm giving you my whole star answer up front. It might be, as I'm delivering this to you, we might converse back and forth about it. Some people are going to let you ask or answer your whole question, and then they might ask follow-ups if maybe there's some nuggets they want to dig into more, or they might just go right to the next question. And so everyone's going to be a little different, but I like to aim for like 2 to 3 minutes for that whole answer if you were delivering it all at once. Does that help out, Asan, and everyone else?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, and we can always talk about that a little bit more. All right, well, let's look at these next few bits. Again, I want this, look at the job description, identify what they're looking for, and then brainstorm 2 to 3 examples. This can be something that you all are just, again, doing multiple times a week or every night, especially if you hope you're going to have interviews soon. Like, start this process now, start this training now. So on interview day, you know you've done all this great prep work. There's also a couple of other ways that you can identify potential interview questions. Hopefully, again, you're all familiar with glassdoor.com. So I believe that I pulled this up. Yes, so Capital One, I just kind of Googled Capital One interview questions. And on Glassdoor, they actually have, well, here are all these different jobs we hire for. Heather, you tell us which role you're interested in. If I was to click on one of these, then you're going to see that people have actually, here are some sample interview questions that Capital One asked for this particular type of role that I'm interested in. So people have actually shared that there. If we're also looking at Handshake, on your Handshake account, hopefully they've kept me logged in. Let's go back to Cognizant. So I'm going to click on them. And this is going to take me to their employer profile page within Handshake. And I looked at them yesterday. Well, look, here are reviews of the company. Oh, look, 4 people have actually given us feedback about their interviewing process. And so I highly recommend always looking at Glassdoor, and if the company has a Handshake profile, looking at the reviews and the interviews, because other students, whether from UVA or other universities, have given you some really helpful feedback and sometimes even particular questions. And if you might not be asked those exact questions, but chances are, if enough people are repeatedly saying, here's this question that this company likes to ask for this position, of course you would want to prepare for that ahead of time. Again, you're all going to get these slides, but these are questions that employers might not directly ask, but they're hoping to learn things about you during the interview that helps them know, like, are you interested in this job? Like, do you want this job? Are you actually interested? Or did you just blanket apply to a couple of companies and you don't even really know what we do? Do you know how to, again, are you confident in your abilities? That might just be, hey, I was able to pick up on this new skill set quickly. And so I have confidence that if there are, again, proprietary software, new processes and procedures that you all use that I'm just not familiar with, I'll be able to pick up on those quickly and hit the ground running. Like, I'm very trainable. So again, it never has to be like, I'm the best at this, or I'm confident that I can do anything, but here's a time in the past where I've learned something quickly or I overcame a challenge, so I know that I'll be able to do that again. And then we said this in the very beginning, but I really want to close with reminding you all that even with this practice that I hope you all take on after today, like it's okay to be nervous. I still get nervous before interviews. I don't know really anyone that has zero nerves before. And I had a student last week that said, no, Heather, I don't feel nervous about this interview. I just got invited for it tomorrow. I feel really nervous. Well, it's okay. Some ways to mitigate that are, of course, doing the things that we've talked about today. If you're someone that likes to engage in breathing exercises or to be open to it, there are all kinds of different things out there. Maybe look online for box breathing. It's where you breathe in for maybe 4 or 5 seconds, hold it for 4 or 5 seconds, exhale for that same time, then inhale again. It can just help calm that heart rate. If you've never heard about the superhero or the power pose that you can strike to help lower your cortisol, to lower those stress hormones, there is a TED talk that is going to be included here. I've definitely struck this power pose a couple of times before big meetings, and like lo and behold, it helped. A lot of folks, just like Asan asked, how long maybe can I talk during the interview about a question? Employers do not mind if you take time to thoughtfully identify an example. So let's just say, even with all this amazing prep you're doing, if they ask you a question, you're like, oh, I don't really have an example set for that right now. Instead of just trying to force one into it, it's okay to thoughtfully nod, and maybe look down, even for 5 to 10 seconds. And then if you feel like it's going to take longer, you might say, I just think I need another moment to think about that one. Employers have even told me they're fine with you taking up to 30 seconds to thoughtfully identify an example that really answers their question versus just to start telling a story and then forget, wait, what was I asked? It's okay to take time. And then if they ask a question where you're like, oh, I'm not quite sure, did they mean X or Y? Or this kind of sounds nuanced, or I'm not, again, quite sure if they're asking me for A and B. It's okay to clarify. Heather, it sounds like you're maybe wanting me to tell you about a teamwork example where this happened. Am I on the right track? Or maybe could you explain that to me a little bit more in depth? Can you elaborate on what you meant there? Again, it's meant to be a conversation. And so if you're just not quite sure what they're asking, it's totally okay to ask. So again, I hope that like these final reminders, like it's okay to be nervous. Dana and I are here to help with that. So I hope everyone has taken away something today that is brand new to them, that it feels like preparing for an interview feels like it's broken down into a process that anyone can actually engage in. It's broken down into enough steps that you can just really manage it in small chunks between now and when you might have an interview. And again, I hope something in here was a new nugget that you can take away. I hope you all actually start developing that toolkit of stories. So Dana has posted more information about interviewing on our office's website. I mentioned Dana and I, my colleague Francis, we all love to meet with students for mock interviews where we can just practice answering these questions together. Before we wrap up today, does anyone have any questions that they want to address? If you need to hop off, no worries. But if you have questions, I'd be happy to address those and keep the recording on. So when you come back to this, you'll be able to see it. You're very welcome. So glad that was helpful. Thank you everyone for coming today, carving out time on your Friday. I'm really happy. Again, we'll go ahead and stop the recording here.